Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back to a very good day after a very good D period that just left, and a fantastic day yesterday at the end of C period, and an upcoming G period that I know is going to be fantastic as well. But where we left off in class, we were talking about the 13 English colonies, right? We just talked about the French colonies expanding down the Mississippi, taking up that center area of North America. We'll talk about that stuff a little bit more. We'll review those things as time goes on, just to try and let you understand that the Europeans and Western civilizations are now expanding into North America and creating colonial settlements all over the place, right? Now, also to give you a heads up, I don't know if you realize this or not yet, but when we were looking at that map earlier that had the French colonies on it, and I was like, oh, which ones of these are the French colonies? You're like, oh, all the red stuff right in here, right? And exactly right, you've got the Great Lakes, the Mississippi River, the Ohio River Valley, all this stuff that they're navigating down, and that is actually the essence of the French colonies right here. This down here is New Spain, but then you got these guys, the British colonies, right? So the British are going to heavily settle Canada as well, but they're also going to heavily settle the eastern seaboard states. And that's where your 13 colonies were really located, most of your eastern seaboard area. The Canadian colonies are a little bit up for dispute when you discuss, like, how many people were there? How cold was it? Were they actually colonies, or were they more like journeymen going there to get supplies and stuff like that? But the big thing, though, is that we talked about the very first attempt at colonization, right? We talked about how, the Roanoke colony is going to be lost and stuff like that. Now, the first permanent colony, though, was Jamestown, Virginia, okay? We left off right about here in D period, and I know we left off right here in C period. The first permanent colony was Jamestown, Virginia, and it's going to pop up in about 1607, okay? 1607, and when we say permanent, we mean it did survive. It didn't disappear and all these other things. And also, the settlers, though, just to give you a heads up, had a very hard time surviving. So just to kind of wrap your mind around this, to get a little bit more well-versed with it, the settlers really struggled in Jamestown to survive the first series of winters. The first series of winters were very harsh, led to periods of starvation, where colonists were literally eating leather from boots and bark off trees. So that period of time, from like about 1608 to 1609/1610 or 1610, it's called the starving times, right? And so these colonists really struggled. And this right here is literally evidence of the starving times. This is a woman's skull that we have found, and her name was Jamestown Jane, right? Jamestown Jane isn't Jane Doe, because we don't know what her real name is, right? But they found her skull in a burial pit outside of Jamestown, and if you look closely at her skull, the front of it has been bashed in, as well as there are tool marks on the forehead. So one of two things happened. This woman was either horrifically murdered, or more than likely, she was cannibalized, right? Her dead body was eaten by other settlers because they were running out of food during this time period, and the only reason that they survived was with the help of the Native Americans. The Native Americans are actually going to meet with them and show them how to fertilize their crops, how to grow like maize, how to grow a lot of different other items and actually survive in this area. And the other big thing about it, though, as well, is you can see those tool marks. That apparently is where they were peeling the skin off the skull to actually eat, which is super gross. Now look, but the big particular item, though, that they find is tobacco, okay? The English settlers at Jamestown discovered a heavy amount of tobacco that was being used by the Native Americans, and they had never seen this crop before. So look really, really quickly. Keep that in the back of your mind, like right back here. You're like, wait, tobacco? The Europeans didn't know what tobacco is? Yeah, there were a lot of crops and goods and things that were over in North America that the Europeans had no idea what it was. You're talking about corn, potatoes, tomatoes, pumpkins, turkeys, cocoa beans, right? Chocolate. Europeans didn't know what chocolate was, and they're just now discovering it from communication with the natives and things like that. Now, again, though, this is always coming with a default, because the natives are also discovering new things from the Europeans, but they're also getting diseases and being forced to work, and literally being forced to work until their death. So in the long run, the Europeans are winning this exchange. But we'll talk more about that exchange as the time goes on, right? Or in this flip, actually. Now, the other big thing that you've probably heard of before is well, my teacher, when we were in 5th grade, we talked about Thanksgiving, and we also talked about the earliest colonies being set up for religious freedom. Okay. Great job. I'm really glad that you have a memory from elementary school. All right, good stuff. But religious freedom, only one colony was set up for religious freedom. One. The rest of them were all set up for monetary gain. They were called joint stock colonies, right? So do me a favor, right, real quick, put a little star somewhere and put joint stock colony. And you don't have to write it next to this. You can actually write it over near Jamestown. Joint stock colony is just like a joint stock company with the EIC. It means that it's a colony started for the reason to make money, right? Whereas the religious freedom one, that's Plymouth, okay? Plymouth was founded by a group of people known as the Puritans, right? And this right here, of course, is that very, very famous rock that is Plymouth Rock. That's got 1620 chiseled into it because the group of people that showed up to colonize that area were apparently on a boat called the Mayflower, and they left a city called Plymouth, England, and then they settled in a new place and called it Plymouth, Massachusetts, right? So the Puritan separatists are going to land in Plymouth. Now, you don't know who Puritans are yet, but we will be talking about them in the next unit, okay? In the next unit, we'll talk heavily about who the Puritans are. The only thing you need to remember is that the Puritans right now, for your sake, are Protestants from England that were not liked at all by the Anglicans, right? They did not get along with the Anglicans that were back in Europe, and so they were heavily persecuted. And because of this persecution, a group of them called separatists showed up, and they went off and colonized other places because they were like, we can't be around you because you won't listen to us, right? And so they actually went and colonized the Massachusetts area with the Massachusetts Bay Company, and they actually literally become what's known as the Religious Freedom Colony, or the Plymouth Colony, right? The Plymouth Colony is very, very well known for its garb, its wardrobe, and they were referred to as pilgrims because they were making a pilgrimage, right? So Puritan separatists were English Protestants that were persecuted back in England. But you know of them like this, right? You think first Thanksgiving, you think the natives helping them survive, you think of all these other things like that. But they ended up moving over there. They established the very first government in the United States called the Mayflower Compact and all this other little goofy stuff. But the Mayflower Compact you'll learn about much more when you get into U.S. history next year, right? We're doing a gloss over this stuff because we got other things to talk about, right? And so, of course, right here, as you can see, the work between the natives and the pilgrims as well, or the Puritans as well. So, the English colonies, though, are going to grow exponentially, and different colonies will be started by different people. So, when you look at the 13 original colonies, they all originally had founders. You had Roger Williams in Rhode Island. You had James Oglethorpe in Georgia. You had Lord Baltimore in Maryland and places like that. So these English colonies, though, are going to keep growing into 13 autonomous colonies stretching all the way from New York State and slightly above in the New Hampshire area all the way down to Georgia. And they're going to grow fast. This right here is so important. Highlight that bad boy. The biggest difference between English colonies and that of the French and Spanish ones was the fact that entire families were coming to colonize for the English, right? The English had whole families that were showing up. Mom, dad, with the intention of creating children and actually living in this place permanently. Whereas the French colonists and the Spanish colonists were much more journeymen, fur trappers, people there to make money and things like that. For example, in New Orleans, no one wanted to go found New Orleans because it was very hard to make money here. Apparently, some of the earliest colonists in New Orleans were prisoners and women that worked on the street is what we'll call them in France because they couldn't find anyone else to go there, right? So people were being forced to go to the French and Spanish colonies, and they were single individuals who were unmarried without the intention of starting families and things like that. Now, over time, they did turn into that. Spanish families will be established. Some Spanish families will end up showing up. But the English colonies grew super fast because whole families were coming to colonize different areas. And then you're going to see some struggles for power. Now, this is a title really quick, and then we got one more little thing to throw out there. You're going to see some wars break out over these things. Because when we looked at this map, again, you've got all these different areas. You got Spanish colonies, French colonies, British colonies right here in this pink right here. These territories are not firm boundaries. You're not saying oh, here is where all of our stuff starts and stops. And they're oh yeah, you're right, that line right there. This is very difficult to figure out where this land begins and ends, right? Some French colonies were literally marked with a sign that just says, this belongs to France. So Europeans are going to start disputes over this land for future colonies. And as these colonies begin to expand, it is going to lead to some violence. So just to keep, again, in the back of your mind, wars like the French and Indian War are going to pop up later in the 1700s as these colonies begin to grow. And they're going to be the very first global conflicts over future colonial holdings. And the reason why this is happening is because it's all in the pursuit of money, right? So they actually want to keep making so much money off of these different colonies because cash crops becomes a very big thing. Now, speaking of cash crops, though, now we have to talk about the lingering societal effects of this global contact, right? So this is a new section of your notes. It's going to be super short. We're going to try and bang this entire thing out because we've got plenty of time right now. But the biggest thing you need to understand is there's going to be massive Western civilization effects that are going to garner themselves off this original contact, right? And so one of the biggest effects of English people setting up colonies, French people setting up colonies, Spanish people setting up colonies, the discovery of these new things, communication with Native Americans, the movement of goods back and forth. One of the biggest ones is the Columbian Exchange, right? So the Columbian Exchange is super important, and you need to put a star next to it. I try to explain this thing every year, and people have such a difficult time understanding it, okay? But let's try to explain it like this. Okay, we're going to look at the definition that would be in like a textbook first, okay? So the Columbian Exchange, named after Columbus, because after 1492, new parts of the world are going to start talking to each other, right? So you've got North and South America on this side of the map. You've got Europe, Africa, Asia on this side of the map, right? So we've got western side, eastern side. These western and eastern sides did not talk or communicate with each other before 1492. No one knew the western side was there, right? So like no one knew North America was there, no one knew South America was there. So there are certain plants and animals that existed in North and South America that when the Europeans saw them, they were like, ooh, let's take this back to Europe and sell it or plant it or use it, right? Just like there were goods from Europe, Asia, Africa that the North Americans and the Native Americans were like, oh, look, let's use this, right? This exchange is going to occur, right? So you're going to get goods from one side of the planet that are going to get swapped for goods on the other side of the planet, and now certain crops exist all over the world, right? So let's put it to you like this. Let's say hypothetically in my classroom, I know Grayson Schmidt sits on the one side, right? Let's say she's in the Europe, Africa, Asia area, and she has grown up her entire life like raising cattle, right? She's got cows and stuff like that. She raises them for their milk and their meat, and she's like, look at those bad boys right there. This is why I got smallpox when I was a kid, and blah, 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 blah. But then you got people over on the western side. You got like, I don't know, who we're going to use over there. You got Mia Sanchez over there, right? Mia Sanchez lives on the western side of the planet. She don't know who Grayson is, and she ain't never seen a cow before, right? But eventually, Grayson's country makes it all the way over the ocean to where Mia's country is, and Mia has been growing cocoa beans her entire life, right? Well, eventually, Mia's cocoa beans are going to end up on the other side of the planet due to this exchange, and Grayson's cows are going to end up over towards Mia's side as well, right? Do you see what I'm talking about? It's just a simple exchange of plants and items. You got really big stuff coming from North America, like pumpkins and squash, and you've also got turkeys and potatoes. Do me a favor, just write potato and just put it in the big letter and just put a star next to it, because potatoes are going to be very, very important later. And then you got other goods coming from this area too. You got sugarcane, bananas, grapes, citrus fruits, and stuff like that coming this direction. So all these goods are being swapped for one another, right? This is the Columbian Exchange. But there's one big thing you need to write down with the Columbian Exchange, though, also. Put a star next to this and be like, however, diseases are a part of the Columbian Exchange and killed many natives, right? So you've got smallpox, influenza, typhus, measles, malaria, diphtheria, whooping cough. All that stuff is going to end up exposing to the North Americans and South Americans now, the Native Americans, and it's going to end up having drastic, dire consequences on their health and their ability to live, right? So those diseases are a part of the Columbian Exchange. Now, I'm going to use these pictures to review the Columbian Exchange with you during class, right? We're going to talk about this during class a little bit, so we'll come back to this guy a little bit later on. Now, other big thing that's going on, though, is that Europeans particularly are winning this Columbian Exchange because they're getting things like new foods, new pumpkins, peppers, corn, potatoes, and that's leading to healthier lifestyles, right? They're having a more well-rounded diet now. They're having the ability to eat certain foods that have vitamin C and other essential vitamins and other very, very good things inside of them. So they're living much healthier lives. Europeans are also bringing new animals, particularly to the Americas, that the Native Americans are going to use, right? Horses, chickens, goats, cows. That's going to make their life a little bit easier when it comes to not having to hunt, but actually being able to domesticate animals as well. And that's going to give them new food sources. And then also, Native Americans are going to use horses for travel and transport and as a beast of burden that they've never seen before, right? So the other big thing, though, again, like we said, though, is that this was to the detriment to the Native Americans because they were also exposed to disease. Now, these new foods and animals, though, will establish healthier lifestyles, even for the poor. Eventually, all right, so like eventually these crops make it down into the poorer sects of like society by about the 1700s, right? By about the 1700s, poor people are starting to grow potatoes. They're starting to actually have access to other crops and stuff, so they're leading much healthier lifestyles. These new foods are cheaper. They're easier to store, and life expectancy is going to increase going into the 1700s due to a lot of different reasons, including the plague's not around anymore, medicine's getting better and stuff like that, but also because, you've got the growth of new and modern like crops and vegetables and better rounded diets, right? So if you look at this population growth chart, you've got like, it's just cruising along nice and slow, and then wham! Like, so as you can see, in the last couple hundred years, population has exploded. And a lot of that is due to the Columbian Exchange and the exchange of these goods, right? Now, also what's going to happen, though, is you're going to see what's known as a commercial revolution. Now, we're going to spend most of class in the next class talking about this particularly, but you're seeing this thing called the price revolution occur, right? Due to the fact that there's now more of an abundance of things and access to goods, the laws of capitalism and supply and demand are beginning to take over, right? So, for example, you're now seeing a great expanse of products rather than a dearth of products, right? So since we have so many more items and vegetables and animals and options and things to eat, you're now seeing prices get dictated by the availability of these things, right? So this commercial revolution is taking over, this consumer revolution, and people are beginning to work for money and actually go out and buy things and stuff like that. So in the way that the commercial revolution works, it all hinges on one economic principle: supply and demand, right? And the law of supply and demand goes like this. If you have a lot of something, that means you can only charge a small amount for it because it means your demand is low, right? So if demand is low, supply is up. But if your demand is high, your supply is low because that means everybody wants to buy your thing, so you only have a few of it left, right? So like that's how the whole thing works. And we'll explain that a little bit more in class. But the commercial revolution and the price revolution is taking over, okay? Now another big thing that you need to understand is this is mostly happening to Spain, but more money is also beginning to circulate through increased trade. So because the Spanish are mining all this gold and silver and they're bringing it back over to Europe, and you've got this problem of like smuggling and stuff like that because like Spanish colonies are only allowed to sell goods or buy goods from other places and stuff like that, or like not from other places, from Spain, but they're buying them from other people as well. So you've got like more gold beginning to circulate through hands throughout Europe. This is leading to inflation, right? So just like you need to know, because inflation's like even affecting the country currently, right? So like even today, inflation is an economic thing you need to understand. The more money that's available, prices tend to go up, right? So if there is more money in the hands of consumers, then people who make products will charge more for their goods. The best way to look at it is like, for example, candy bars. When I was a kid, candy bar only cost like 75 cents. Some of you are probably like, oh, it probably only cost a nickel. I'm not that old. Calm down. So now, but the big thing was it cost about like 75 cents. It was $1 for a king size, right? Now, it's like $1.25 for a candy bar, and it's like $1.50 for a king size, right? So you have to understand that entire understanding of like prices begin to rise when more money is available, right? And we'll talk more about inflation a little bit more as time goes on. But all of this stuff relates back to one thing that is beginning to be born, and it's called capitalism, right? Capitalism emerged on its own. No one sat around one day and was like, oh, this is what we'll do. No, capitalism grew out of this new connection between people, out of the growth of the commercial revolution, after we left subsistence-based economics, right? Capitalism is when a business is owned privately, not by its government, right? So for example, the East India companies are the very first capital companies, right? So entrepreneurs are what they're referred to, are business owners that are going to invest money to start companies, and they're going to use that to make a profit, right? So for example, if you got like Caroline Gutierrez, right? And Caroline starts a business, she is now an entrepreneur, and she is a part of a capital system, right? So capital as in she is trying to make money, and she's going to take some of that profit and reinvest it into her business, right? So now the big thing about it though, also, you don't need that. The last one is this. But you know what? Don't write that down. Don't write that down. We're going to talk about that a little bit more when we get back into class, okay? So I'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.